Namaste, aloha, welcome to the Yoga Wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. My name is Janapati Das. I apologize if I'm a little bit late tonight. We are going to read from the Bhagavad Gita as it is. This is the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and it is translated by my spiritual grandfather, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the spiritual master of my spiritual master. So I'd like to offer my respects to him, and I'd offer my most humble obeisances to my spiritual teacher, Jagat Guru Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa Srila Prabhupada, who taught me everything I know about the Bhagavad Gita, and which is what I'm sharing with you tonight. So please accept my respects and thank you so much for tuning in tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to read from the Bhagavad Gita, we're going to discuss it a little bit, and read the purports from His Divine Grace. And right now what we're going to do is we're going to chant Krishna's names, which is the prime benediction for humanity. And let's see here, where do I want to start? Hari Bol, Krishna Krishna. So, welcome again to Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. Tonight we are going to read from a few verses from chapter 6 and kind of citing a few other chapters and verses. I've always said that, to summarize, I was teaching a class the other day in middle school, and during my break, and some students were there catching up on assignments. And anyway, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita as it is, of course, preparing, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. And the student asked me what it was. So I told them, but one thing I realized when it's really hard to summarize the meaning of the Bhagavad Gita and talk about it so flippantly, because it's such a wonderful and deep, although the concepts are very simple, right? The Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan, means the Supreme Personality of God, Bhagavan, right? Gita is song of God, is what it's loosely translated as in English. But it's more than just a song of God. It's an actual eternal relationship that we have with the Supreme Personality of God. And so tonight, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is something that was spoken in this particular, part of the Mahabharata, which was a greater epic. But it is something that is eternal and is continuously being spoken all over the universe through all time, eternally. So when sometimes people think, well, the Bhagavad Gita was at a particular time in a particular place and it never existed outside of that sort of time spectrum, that's not true, because the Bhagavad Gita is continuously going on and continuously being revealed. This relationship that we have with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with God, is an eternal relationship that continuously goes on. And so we are going to actually read in a chapter called Sankhya Yoga. And Sankhya Yoga is also, there are terminologies that I will go through and explain that they have very deep meanings. Of course, Sankhya Yoga is the study loosely translated, or loose meaning of it, of course, is the difference between spiritual energy and material energy, and who is the controller of both. Yoga, of course, is a term that sort of is thrown around a bit. People tend to think of it as something that you do as an exercise. Well, that is partially true. That is kind of hatha yoga. But yoga itself is actually a word that means to connect, or to reconnect our eternal relationship, or even to have an eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So when one is truly in yoga, one is living the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. But Sankhya Yoga is a very wonderful chapter. It's all chapters in the Bhagavad Gita are. And I'm just going to read through these verses. We're going to talk some concepts about yoga and yogi, the term yogi. Sometimes people have heard that term, yogi, as a practitioner of yoga, and what it means to be a yogi, and why one should be a yogi in this world, and what that means. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, if you have this Bhagavad Gita, and I would recommend, of course, this Bhagavad Gita as it is, from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So you can follow along. So this is chapter 6, text 18. So start with Krishna speaking, of course, to Arjuna on this battlefield before this great battle, and laying it out to Arjuna. So he says to Arjuna, when the yogi, by practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to have attained yoga. Continuing on to text 19, as a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist whose mind is controlled remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. Going on to text 20 to 23, the stage of perfection is called trance or samadhi, when one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness and enjoys himself through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. So, wonderful verses. We're going to get into that a little bit. So we were talking about this idea of yogi. So what Krishna is doing in this, what makes the Bhagavad Gita such a wonderful treatise and spiritual text is the story of Arjuna and Krishna. Krishna is teaching Arjuna how to be a yogi, but he's also, in a greater sense, teaching us how all to be a yogi. And what does that mean? We're going to get into that. So if we know the story a little bit, right, we know that Arjuna was one of the Pandava brothers in the story of the Mahabharata, which is, yes, a story, but it's actual history. So there were really Pandavas and there were really Krishna. So these are real big historical figures. And Krishna, of course, being beyond the historical, being God, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so Arjuna, I don't want to get too much in. If you want to read the Mahabharata, or I would recommend that. But there was of course, a battle about to transpire between a large amount of people on the planet, one siding with the Pandava brothers and one siding with the cousins of the Pandavas, Duryodhana and his brothers, fighting over the right for the kingdom. But of course, Krishna was riding as a chariot driver for Arjuna, even though he was God, and he could have probably wiped out everybody. You can see him here; he's there, and there's Arjuna. And so, but Arjuna, of course, was put into a situation. If you know the story, he was put into the situation where he was overwhelmed by seeing all of his family members and friends and well-wishers and martial teachers and whatnot on both sides of the battlefield about to kill each other in this huge battle over what he thought was actually a trivial sort of thing, even though it wasn't really trivial. It was a very important matter, and of course, you know, from a somewhat, I mean, maybe from a spiritual perspective, you might think, well, okay, you know, it's a material thing. We're fighting over material wealth and this kingdom and who gets the power and whatnot. But there was actually a larger sense in the fact that Krishna's, one of Krishna's purposes of coming to the material world in this particular time was to vanquish the burden of sort of demoniac kings and kshatriyas and and to protect the devotees and give out his pastimes in this material world. But so Arjuna, of course, was put into this situation where he was overwhelmed with the idea of killing, even though everything was justified for him to fight this battle, and he knew it up to that point. But when he stepped out onto the battlefield before the battle and saw all these people, he became overwhelmed, and that's described in the first first few chapters, but mostly in the first chapter. So Krishna is actually teaching Arjuna how to be a yogi by fighting, which is a very interesting concept, because you would think Arjuna's idea was, I want to be a yogi, and his idea of this yogi, you know, like the guy in the one loincloth and, you know, maybe dirty and matted hair, and or with this bald head and sitting out in the forest meditating. This was his idea of like, okay, instead of fighting and killing all these people, I can be this peaceful guy and go off to the forest and be a yogi, right? Be a renunciate, as he was calling it. But Krishna was saying this is not what that means, and he explains this, and in these verses, it is explained in the purport. It's also explained what a yogi really means. A yogi means to dovetail one's life, one's senses, one's mind, everything that one has in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And there was Krishna, there was God telling him, I want you to fight. And instead he was saying, you know, I actually want to serve you by not doing that, by doing this thing. So he was like saying, you know, a lot of times even your spiritual teacher might ask you to do something, and you think, I don't really want to do that. And if you look at the material world, basically, and then this is, you know, in the first few verses, it was talking about the idea of the false, you know, the false ego and the material body and the conditioning that we have in this material world to want to do our own will, basically, not to do God's will. And so Arjuna was not really being a yogi, and Krishna was saying, you're not really going to be a yogi because you're not doing what I'm asking you to do. You're actually doing what you want to do, and you give me this whole argument of why you think it's better to not fight. So he's sitting, you know, in the first chapter, explaining all the rules and regulations of the Vedic system of why it's bad to fight this battle, even though Krishna wants him to fight this battle. So then, but Krishna basically goes deeper, and this is why this is a wonderful analogy of our own lives and spiritual lives, because what appears sometimes what we think is what is the best is not always the best when it's laid up against what our spiritual teacher wants. It's never really what the best if it's opposite of what our spiritual teacher wants and what Krishna wants. Let's read a little bit of the purport here. So he says, when the yogi, by the practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, he is said to have attained yoga. And there is a verse in here from the Srimad Bhagavatam of a great king, whose name was King Ambarisha, and described about how he was able to use his senses and his mind and his body in the service of Krishna, of the service of the Lord. It says, King Ambarisha, first of all, engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then one after another, he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hand in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental forms of the Lord, his body in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of smell in smelling the scents of the lotus flower offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulasi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to places of pilgrimage, and the temple of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. So that was an example of how Maharaj Ambarisha utilized, even though he was a great king, there's a nice analogy with that, because Arjuna and his brothers were going to rule over this kingdom, and Krishna was saying, well, it's not about it's not about the material wealth. You think I'm going to become a renunciate and give that all up, but instead of thinking, or I'm going to give up my fighting. And really what Krishna is saying is that you can use so many things, everything that's here that you have in this material world can be redirected and reused towards the service of God, as was explained by King Ambarisha and what he did. Or we could use it all in the service of ourselves, which is what 99% of people do already. And so so there is a difference between, the living entity, who is marginal, can be influenced by the material energy with the desire to use that for their own glory and their own service, which is most people in the material world. Or you can utilize that same energy in the service of Krishna. So you have two people who could be doing exactly the same thing, going to work, whatever job they might have, as a warrior, as a policeman, as a teacher, as, so many different paths, right? In this case, Arjuna was a warrior. So Krishna was saying, well, just do this as an offering unto me in love and devotion, and don't be attached to the outcome of it. You're doing it as an offering to me. So it's kind of like, I think I'm trying to think of an analogy of that. I guess it's sort of like when you give a gift to somebody, and it's kind of like the idea of giving the gift is in love. You love that person, and you don't sit there and wonder, was that, it's like, is he gonna like it? It's like, or maybe that was the best thing to do, or to give them. Maybe people would do that in material, but in the case of offering, you just offer it. You offer it in love and devotion. The love is really what Krishna is interested in. So, and they go on to say, as a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist, whose mind is controlled, remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendental self. And so that is, that kind of service done in dedication. You could be fighting a battle, which is a very chaotic situation, but because you are focused on as an offering to God, it is like your mind is very controlled, right? Your mind is controlled. Your mind is linked. Yukta is the Sanskrit word that's used here, or yoga, right? It's linked in service. And so there is a kind of a story, a little analogy that of the $20 bill or $100 bill that someone finds on the ground, right? You have the differences. You have the materialist, you have the so-called renunciate yogi, who Arjuna is trying to be, right? And then there's a true yogi, or the bhakta, the devotee of Krishna, who, so the three analogies is the materialist sees the money on the ground, immediately kind of looks around to make sure nobody's seen it, you know? So they grab it and they're like, ooh, how can I use this for my own enjoyment, you know? And they run off with the money. And then the so-called renunciate of what Arjuna wanted to be sees the money and was like, ooh, very bad. I'm going to go away from that, you know? I'm going to, you know, try to stay away from the things that I don't want to, you know, whatever. And it's going to mess up my own meditation practices or whatever, you know. And then there's the devotee who sees the money and says that it belongs to someone, or uses it in the service of God, because he knows that everything is owned and controlled by God, and if he sees the money, he can use the money in the service of God, and not for his own glory, right? Or not trying to reject it. So, you know, really what's going on with Arjuna is that he's thinking he's going to be a renunciate, but he's actually wanting to do, still just doing a self-centered, selfish kind of like, I want to do what I want to do, you know, even if it appears as holy or you know, renounced, is not really renounced. Sometimes that's the worst, actually worse than a materialist. A rank materialist is somebody who tries to do something so-called spiritual, you know, like the people that are like, I'm not spiritual, or I'm not religious, I'm actually spiritual. So actually, it's a way of saying I'm lazy, right? So they're not willing to do the work. They just want the prestige of saying, oh, look how holy I am, and have people, you know, admire them for being holy, right? So Arjuna, of course, there's a deeper meaning to this, but we're going to go into this last verse a little bit more, which is, you know, there's so much to it, and we only have so much time to work with it, but the stage of perfection is called trance, or samadhi. So there is a terminology, of course, called the Ashtanga yoga system, right? And it was in the times past where you had different branches. There's 8 limbs. Ashtanga means 8 limbs, or 8 branches, and there are different. So I guess you could call them branches, but also like steps, so to speak. So you had like yama, niyama, which are, you know, regulative kind of things. Do this, don't do that. You know, this is good. You know, be clean, keep your body clean, try to keep your mind clean, do good for people. You know, that kind of thing. Try to stay away from, you know, these things that will keep you away from spiritual life. And then we had asana, which is like what sometimes people, I guess, refer to as yoga, or hatha yoga, with like positions. Asana is really a term that refers to seating, or sit, a place to sit. So they're postures, and of course they were done in a way to breathe and to work with your body and strengthen your body, so that if you have to sit and meditate for a long period of time, your body doesn't hurt. You know, like most people can't even sit still nowadays. They're so like, they're like, you know, even me, I'm just like, okay, you know, and I do some yoga too. So then we have, of course, the pranayam. Pranayam is breathing techniques and breathing practices that help calm the mind, calm the body, help focus the mind a little bit, you know. And then pratyahara, of course, which is to withdraw the senses, you know, the mind from the senses and what's going on in the senses. And then we have, I always get these kind of backwards, I think, dhyana, which is to focus on something. Maybe it was dhyana. So I'm not a total scholar in that, but maybe if you want to put that in the comment, if you know that one, those orders. It's also in the Bhagavad Gita here, I could pull it up, but we'll just get to the point. So then that one is the ability to focus on something. So in life, you can, we're always like focusing on different things, and sometimes we have skills in particular things, business, or like I'm skilled in music, and so I can focus very easily on music. I can focus on the sound of music because I've spent a lot of time, right? But then we get to the next stage of Ashtanga Yoga, and it's actually focusing our mind on spiritual matters and our Krishna, right? We focus our mind on that. And then, so we have all these steps where we're being able to, we've like been able to control our do our do's and don'ts and get really good at that, and then do our asanas really well and our breathing techniques really well, and being able to withdraw the mind and focus on things, focus on spiritual matters. And then we get to samadhi, which is trance, which is ultimately we've been focusing on Krishna, we've gotten all those things out of the way, and now we can be in quote unquote trance. So it's not like hypnotist or something. It's actually being absorbed in Krishna, being absorbed in service to Krishna. But this day and age, it's really difficult to do all those things and go step by step, and you're just like, you could spend all life, and you could even, as Bhaktivedanta Swami explains in here, you can even get tripped up on some of the lower ones you're doing. You see people, they're like, I can do all these pretzels in my yoga asana things, or they look good, or they're very flexible, and they attract a lot of women followers, and they're just like, oh, look at me, and then they have sex with their followers. So they're not, the purpose of the Ashtanga system is screwed up. So in this day and age, because we're screwed up, and it is a Kali Yuga process age, and things are messed up, we have a very easy process, and that was what Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Krishna himself, came as the yajna, or sacrifice of this age, which is the Sankirtan yajna, which is the hearing and chanting of Krishna's names, right? Which is very easy, very fun, very wonderful. We did a little bit of it in the beginning. This channel, Yoga Kirtan Hawaii, is dedicated to a lot of that kirtan. You can go to the library. We have a YouTube channel also for that. It is the best and most effective means of self-realization in this day and age. It's a wonderful practice, and that's all you really have to do, and by doing that, you find that all these other things start to happen automatically. You may not want to, follow the regulations. You may like to date and, sex life or whatever, or you may want to eat meat or all these kind of things, but you just come and chant, and you find after a while you're like, oh, this is very tasteful. This is the greatest taste. All those other things that I've tried to find in the material world, they're not as attractive to me anymore, because the chanting of Krishna's name is so attractive to me that I don't even want to do them anymore. So it's like, it's really wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from this. So I was just talking about, kind of got off on a tangent, but we're talking about samadhi, right? The truth samadhi, right, is when one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. Once upon a time, that was Ashtanga yoga, right? You don't need to do all those steps anymore. Yoga is the practice of hearing and chanting Krishna's names. That's yoga. The practice of yoga for us, a lot of us, I don't know about you, but for me particularly, is given by my spiritual master as a sadhana bhakti, or practice of yoga, because I'm not a good yogi. I need practice, because my mind is I'm still attracted to a lot of these things, and that's the practice of yoga. The beauty of bhakti yoga is that you can practice it and be purified and find happiness and joy in it, and at the same time go towards the goal where you come to this point, and this is actually stated in this purport, which I'm going to read. I'll read a little bit right now, as the goal, right? And once we've reached the goal, we continue on with this practice eternally. So it's wonderful. So it's very, very sweet. It becomes more and more sweet. So Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, His Divine Grace, says in this purport, by practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. That was the point I was making, right? This is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle. And after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the supersoul through transcendental mind and intelligence without any misgivings of identifying the self with the superself. In other words, the more one becomes purified, the more one realizes who they are, what the purpose of their life is, and without also becoming trapped in this idea that, oh, I am the supreme, right? So I'm just going to jump ahead here because they talk about Patanjali Muni, right, who is a great writer, yogi, and writer of the Yoga Sutras. He said, Purushartha, excuse my Sanskrit, right? I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but Shunyanam Gunanyam Prati Prashayava Kaibalyam Swarupa Pratisha Va Chiti Shaktir Iti. So he says this Chiti Shakti, or internal potency, is transcendental, right? The internal potency of Krishna, the spiritual energy of Krishna, love for God. Purushartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called Kaivalyam by the monist. In other words, the person who believes that it is all one, or all one God, the impersonal yogic thought, believes that it's that the Kaivalyam that Patanjali is talking about here is this oneness, that we're all just one. But according to Patanjali, according to him, this Kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of his constitutional position. In other words, understands that, what is explained a lot in the second verse of this Bhagavad Gita, that for the embodied soul, Krishna tells Arjuna, for the embodied soul, there is neither birth nor death, nor having once been does he ever cease to be. He's eternal, ever-existing, primeval, and he's not slain when the body is slain. So in other words, he said that there is an eternal spiritual entity, which is a Chitta Bheda Veda Tattva, simultaneously one with Krishna, but also separate. So the living entity is separate. It's not all one. It is, but it isn't. It's the beauty of the thing. There is an eternal, individual essence of the living entity of us. And our relationship with this Bhagavad Gita, this relationship that we have with Krishna, is our oneness of will, right? In other words, Krishna is telling Arjuna, do this for me. Arjuna does this for Krishna. He is living in yoga. He is connected. There is that Kaivalyam. There is a realization that I am an eternal spirit soul, and I am a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is my father, mother, my best friend, but I am not the Supreme. I am the same in quality, but not of quantity. And my function, my eternal function, is to render loving service to Krishna. That's the truth of that. So it says, but according to Patanjali, this Kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of its constitutional position. Right? In the words of Lord Chaitanya, the state of affairs is called Shetadapana Marjanam, or the clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. So everything that is happening in this material world is an impure, is a covering. It's like dust, considered to be dust over a mirror, or a covering, a material covering over our heart, so that we do not understand who we really are. We think, therefore, that we are this body, we are this mind, it's about us. It's not about God or God doesn't exist. This awareness is covered because of our own decision to not love and serve Him. We've turned our own back to Krishna. So the clearance is actually liberation. The theory of nirvana, so this is a term we may have heard, not just a rock band. It's also a term maybe we've heard in Buddhism. Sometimes it's translated as blown out, right? And when we think about the Buddhist concept, it's this sort of idea that there really is no self, but that there is, the point of nirvana is realizing that we do not exist. So that we want to go with that, then why are we even having a show tonight? We don't exist, sorry. But the true meaning of nirvana is actually having to do with the cessation. As they say, a cessation, right here, after nirvana or material cessation. So the desire to lord and control, the desire to relate to the material energy as us, is the point of nirvana. At that point becomes another stage, which is called Brahmabhuta, or in other words here, there is a manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service of the Lord known as Krishna consciousness. So the beauty, what I was saying before, the beauty of this practice, in this practice, sadhana bhakti, is that we can be engaged in a purifying activity. Like Arjuna, we can be engaged in a purifying activity, and we can offer it as an offering to God, even if we're not pure in heart, even if we're not, and we're not. There's no perfection in our life, but we have a lot of faults and whatnot. As long as we offer our life as best as we can to our spiritual teacher, we can try to be pleasing to our spiritual teacher, try to be pleasing to Krishna. Try to offer our life to Krishna. Fight like Arjuna. When I mean fight, I'm not a warrior, so I'm not going to go out on the battlefield, but I am a teacher, so I will teach as best as I can, try to be pleasing to my spiritual master, even though I am completely an imperfect person. By the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he has given us this opportunity to do this, and the greatest means by how we can serve him is by hearing and repeating his holy names. So a little bit more from this, and then we'll maybe get on to some chanting here. After nirvana or material cessation, there is a manifestation of spiritual activities or the devotional service of the Lord known as Krishna consciousness. In the words of the Bhagavatam, this is the real life of the living entity. Let that sink in. This is the real life of the living entity. This is the most important thing. Being a yogi is the most important thing. In fact, in truth, we're all yogis. Somebody, there were some friends of mine who were trying to understand that concept of when they think be a yogi, that means you've got to be very austere and, no, being a yogi means dedicating your life, visiting every day. How am I being pleasing to my spiritual master? How am I being pleasing to Krishna? What am I doing in my life to serve them? What am I doing in this life to share this knowledge with people? That's being a yogi. That's living your life in yoga. And so when we say to be a yogi, be like Arjuna, Arjuna would go, as they would say in Hawaii, Eddie would go. You always say Arjuna would go. You can go too, you should go. So Maya, or illusion, is the condition of the spiritual life contaminated by material infections. So this is everything that in this story, Arjuna is covered by Maya, in the sense that he's thinking, what's best for me? And I can even tell you, Krishna, I can tell you, Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, that actually it's better if I do it this way, because what I'm saying indirectly is that I'm Krishna, not you. So, sometimes, not sometimes, but always, we need to visit that. If our spiritual teacher says something, and we're like, well, actually, that's the material infection, right? Liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal living position of the living entity. Let's go on here. Just read something else here. The best practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness, which is not baffling. This is the best practice of yoga. All yoga systems, actually, all Vedic systems, are ultimately to elevate one to this point, to understand Krishna consciousness, to understand Krishna. Krishna conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. That's why I was saying that established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks that there is no greater gain. It's kind of like, why would you be a dog, as Jesus Christ said, be a dog that returns to your vomit, and you've reached, it's kind of like you've reached something that's very tasty and very wonderful. So the devotee, coming that, is not attracted to those things that he was attracted to before, not by some kind of power of himself, but by the power of his dedication, by hearing and chanting Krishna's names, by serving their spiritual master, by trying to serve Krishna, trying to live your life in Krishna consciousness. As long as the material body exists, which it does, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. So this is another thing. It's not saying that, as Arjuna was thinking, I got to go off and deny all these things. It was actually, Krishna was saying, use what you have in your service, right? So it's not, being a yogi doesn't mean everybody needs to go off to the Himalayas and, sit on wear a loincloth and sit on a deer skin and eat grass and air, and just not live in the material world. You have to live in the material world. Not everybody can go off and do that. And this kind of meditation is practically impossible in this day and age. But you can be doing meditation by just living in the material world, but living for Krishna. But a person who is in pure bhakti yoga or in Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. So we eat, we sleep, we mate, we defend, we do these things in the material world. We keep them regulated, and we keep our mind focused by hearing and chanting Krishna's names, by engaging in the process every day. And these things become easier as long as we're practicing them. So that being said, we're just going to go ahead and do some meditation, be a yogi. Thank you very much. tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, my plug for Yoga Kirtan Hawaii. We do have a library on Facebook, but we also have a YouTube channel. So please, if you have not subscribed to that channel, please do. We are constantly uploading videos, and feel free to like, subscribe, and to comment on the videos. Let's get the chanting out. The chanting and the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is spread around the world. Thank you very much. Namaste.